A lot of companies are actually leaning into brand, and not just throwing, hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars out on it's a very saturated market, right? Like we all know everyone's in the game of paid ads and sending a bunch of emails and doing LinkedIn posts and or sending in paid LinkedIn emails to your inbox. And so I think you got to kind of take a step back and really focus on positioning, on your company narrative, on your C-level narrative, on what you're actually like an expert on, and then really build on your POV, right? What actually separates you? What value are you adding? And so it starts with organic and like what is your voice? Um, and then building off of that on specific channel experimentation, right? It's like in an ideal world, you've got your CEO having a platform and talking about a topic, and you've got select experts within your organization who are experts around regulations or security or data privacy or consumer protections, and they have a platform so that folks are actually listening to them and saying, hey, they're helping me, right? I'm learning this area and I'm following this person because what kind of content I'm reading every time they make a post is helpful for me, right? So it's being helpful.
Welcome back, everyone. On the fourth episode of the East Peak podcast, I have the pleasure of introducing Lauren Volpi. Lauren has over 20 years experience in marketing and has had some tours of duty at brands including Pivotal Software and its parent company VMware, as well as Mixpanel. And she's currently the SVP of Marketing at DataGrail. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Happy December.
Ditto. Christmas is right around the corner here. So awesome. Well, in keeping with the theme of this podcast, I'm mostly talking to, operators that make the GTM world go round. A lot of the seed and early stage businesses I speak with, I find a lot of value hearing from people like yourself that have really deep experience in their respective domains. And so today we'll just talk about, in your opinion, what great looks like in the marketing world. But maybe before we jump into that, what can you share with us kind of about your current role and remit and what you do at DataGrail?
Yeah, that's a great way to start. So I've been at DataGrail for about 3 months. And for those of you who haven't heard of DataGrail, it's been around since 2018 and we're in the data privacy space. And so I think the use case there are brands that have a ton of traffic, consumer brands specifically like Nike or Overstock.com or Restoration Hardware, where they're collecting a ton of information from consumers. And regulations have passed like CCPA and GDPR, and all sorts of laws have been created over the past 5 or 6 years, starting in 2018, where it's created this pressure where consumers are now realizing there's all this data out there, right? So there's proliferation of data, and consumers are realizing, hey, like I don't want all my information being locked in all these applications and systems. And so people are getting agency to be able to request that data back from these companies. And we all know about data breaches and the stories around Sephora and 23andMe, where these companies get hacked and your personal information is getting misused. And so I think the culmination of what's happening with regulations, consumer rights, and then brand trust and loyalty is created this amazing space in solving a problem where we've automated those requests. So Gartner basically has estimated it takes 50 hours on average for every data subject request. So if I, Lauren Volpe, say, hey, Nike, I want all my personal information I've ever given to you when I'm using your run app or bought shoes in the store, if they don't have a software to automate all of that, it can take them upwards of 50 hours per request and 13 or 14 people trying to look across all the different systems where your data may be sitting. So I joined DataGrail because I think their mission of what they're trying to solve for is truly solving a real problem and creating, one, reducing risk, two, creating brand loyalty, and three, I think it's just going to change even more with generative AI, right? Which is also another example of like proliferation of data in, data out, and companies not being able to understand where that data is going.
Totally. It sounds like the timing's really right to solve the problem that you all are solving over there, both from like a compliance and just like customer need perspective. So very cool.
Yeah.
Um, awesome. So, I've had the privilege of working both with you, but lots of other great marketing leaders in my personal career, and I've kind of seen this arc. And correct me if you think about it differently, but it seems like once upon a time, a lot of the remit of general marketing leaders was brand oriented, and the extent to which they were involved in the selling motion involved trade show booths and maybe some flyers and stuff like that in the good old days. And fast forward to maybe like 10 years ago, demand generation has increasingly been an important part of the remit of marketing leaders. How do you kind of think of like balancing those two extremes today? And, maybe personally, is there one side of the equation you lean to more than the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. Having done this job for, as we talked about 20 years, I've seen lots of different stages of companies. I've worked for public stage companies. I've worked for, small stage startups. And I think, marketing is one of those uh, challenging, areas that's hard. It is both art and science. And the reason behind that is it's both a feeling and an emotional reaction you're trying to get from your customers. It's the tip of the spear of when you're driving down a highway, right? The most tangible example is, what does that billboard say? And does it say something that creates a response in you that generates curiosity? Or if you're at an event and you're walking by all these different booths and someone says something to you that invites you in, right? Like, do you want to get a demo or learn more about that product if it's trying to solve a problem for you? And then there's all these like household brands, right? Of like wanting to be associated um, with these companies because they make you feel like you're a part of something, some like inside club, right? And Apple's like a great
Mm-hmm.
example. Um, and then everything's been digitized, right? So when I started in marketing 20 years ago, it was like going by trade show booths and reading collateral. And now most people are doing their research online, right? So that whole idea of being PLG focused and wanting to make sure that customers can do all the research up front without necessarily having to engage with a sales team until they're ready. So I do think there is a balance. Like, the way I look at marketing as a whole is you need three areas of focus, and you can't just do one without the other, to be honest. 3 areas of focus. So one on the left being product marketing, and product marketing is probably one of the toughest jobs within the marketing organization, and those folks are really in charge of what I bucket into perception, right? So how do you position yourselves? And April Dunford, she does publishes a great book, Awesomely Awesome. It's like the job of the
Mm-hmm.
product marketer is to take what your product's actually solving and then drill it down into something that's digestible so that you can awk both words and some sort of visual architecture to say, hey, I'm looking at 5 different vendors. Why does this vendor stand out? What's the value proposition that I should be looking at X vendor versus Y? And so I think the job of the product marketer is to help them get closer to that decision, whether it's build versus buy or looking at your competitors. And so, that everything you see with presentations, right? The messaging that a sales rep says to you in that first conversation. Um, how do you respond when they're asking about other competitors? That's the people behind that on the marketing team are the PMMs.
Mm-hmm.
And then moving over, I think the second area that we talked about, brand marketing, is still so important. Like, I was just at a PLG company mix panel where they leaned heavy. We doubled down on our brand investment because we had 8,000 customers. And so um, people in India or Brazil, like, knowing that mix panel helped them find product market fit was like a signal that, like, hey, I'm doing a cool startup, and I should be using mixed panels as I'm trying to get money from my investors. And so
Mm-hmm.
brand is also so important. It's about storytelling and that narrative and that feeling. And so if you don't have a strong brand, then you've got like a fragmentation challenge where your CS team is saying something different to their customers than your sales team is saying to prospects, and your marketing team is saying one thing on the website, but then it's not consistent. And so brand is so important because for a few reasons. One, you want everyone singing from the same song sheet, and you want to be able to have a holistic, comprehensive approach in how you talk to the market, whether that's investors or analysts or press or your customers. Like, you've got to have that foundation of brand. And ironically, we're going through a rebrand right now. just for that reason. It's been underinvested, and I think what happens if you don't have a strong brand, then you have a lot of activity and a lot of movement,
Hmm.
but it doesn't feel connected. And so I think brand has this ability to create that connective tissue and that feeling for your customers.
Hmm.
And then the last one is demand gen, right? So that's kind of my like wheelhouse where I've spent a lot of the better part of my last 10 years of my career. And that area I think has seen a ton of growth and change because of integrated campaigns and how powerful they are. All the data that marketers can now see of what a customer is doing, right? We've got visibility into the first time you come to a website, from clicking on a social post to we know you attended a trade show and then came to this dinner. And I think the power of that, I think, is super interesting, but also super creepy, right? Is because
Hmm.
we can see it all too well how a customer buys, and that's all that ICP work of like, who's your ideal customer profile, what personas you're going after, what kind of offers you want to give to them to compel them to take action. And so I think like demand gen is great, but it also can be really messy if you don't put it all together into these strategic campaigns. And when I say strategic campaigns, meaning you segment a specific audience with a specific offer, and then you drive across like a channel strategy, right? So right now we're doing a competitive campaign as an example, going after an existing customer base and basically giving them a discount. And we're using very specific channels and ads, and working across CS and finance, to make sure we can basically rip and replace those customers off of that. So I think that's the three groups really working together is truly like a really powerful marketing organization.
Great. I think that's a fantastic summary for people that have been like kind of tangential to marketing, but never really seen it all put together like that. So that's a great summary. Thanks for that.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm definitely like, I think the pendulum can swing back and forth in trends in industry and stuff, but I'm increasingly like much more sympathetic to like, obviously like the PMs. Like I've had the pleasure of working with great ones over the years at New Relic and elsewhere, but um, like the role that brand plays, like I think there was this kind of infatuation for a while there that you really could measure and monetize everything when it came to demand gen. And I think what we're seeing, at least from my perspective, is Google is kind of choking on its own exhaust as we reach the tail end of the SEO era and content marketing era.
Mhm.
And it's not really as dependable as it used to be. And so many of the metrics that seem to work with the demand waterfall,
Mhm.
from MQL to opportunity to close, really seem to have broken since we've kicked off SaaSmageddon here. And so I think it's really showing just like how important brand is, right? Because I heard someone say this awesome quote the other day, which is like, no one just does a Google search like de novo for no reason, right? Like
Yeah.
you and I talk about a cool product or a new company or a different way of doing something, and you might come through Google, but like that isn't really the source of it in the way that
Right.
we might label it web
Yeah.
or, Google. And so like I think like stepping back and having a more holistic focus of like where are people having conversations about us or about this problem and engaging them there,
Mhm.
particularly from a brand perspective, I think is super important.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is touching a lot on Chris Walker and what he says about the dark funnel, right? And how attribution
Hmm.
is broken, and really at the end of the day, like where people are having all sorts of conversations with their peers, right? They're asking, who are you working with? They're talking to their analysts. They're looking on online forums that marketing can't track. And so that's this
Hmm.
idea of like, he's always says like, when you're collecting information, it's like, well, where did you hear from us, right? We all get
Hmm.
that drop down, because I think oftentimes that tracking is broken. um, I work for a company that I was at PLG companies. Now we're direct sales. And so we're moving in this ABM kind of motion. And I think it's, in order to win over and close these large enterprises, right? These deals are very long. So they could be 6 to 12 months, and you've got to engage with upwards of 4 to 10 people in any deal cycle, right? We know now more than ever people are reducing their budget. consolidating software, CFOs involved, CIOs involved, and all of a sudden you've got to appease all these buyers, or at least influence them to be able to make a case for why they should consider, spending money on you. And so I think requires a lot of cross-functional communication and really getting in the huddle with your CS, SDR, sales, marketing, and executive leadership team so that you really can surround these accounts and have discussions at an account by account level. And you and I
Mm-hmm.
did this, right? When we were at Sigma together, we would go after each deal, and we used MedPick, right? And so between everyone, we can know like, hey, are we talking to the right champion? Do we need to go outbound to this missing person? Or hey, we're engaged in an early sales cycle marketing. Can you go retarget them with some specific ads and messaging because we haven't been able to connect with, X, Y, and Z person? And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where the most powerful type of um, effective cross-functional, trying to win over new business and expand over existing business happens, is when you really don't speak in these large waves of funnels, and you're not looking at just the conversion rates. Like those conversion rates are good for finance and good for budget justification and understanding where you should spend
Mm-hmm.
more money or wind down money, and makes a ton of sense, right? Like I can just say like, we're not optimizing for this channel on LinkedIn, so let's spend less here. But it's not
Mm-hmm.
going to help um, us build a strategic plan for an entire year on where we want to take bets, and how we can actually move the needle to like, grow our business by 30, 40, 50%. You can't do that by spending more money on PPC and just driving a bunch of paid spend. So long-winded answer.
Preach. Yeah. 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 I think the thing that's insidious about these funnels, and Chris Walker, I know you alluded to, says this a lot, but like, an MQL is not fungible like a dollar, right? Like they vary a lot in the way that they come in, whether it's pretty direct hand raising or an ebook download. And I think a lot of times, if you're not sophisticated, you can throw them all in the funnel and miss some like really important patterns. So when you are able to do that, surround an account and like a true ABM motion, like that is really powerful. We could do it. And I think it is so much easier to do it at a smaller stage company like that. So
It is, yeah. And
cool.
an example, right, is like we are only passing over hand raisers, right? Part of the winning the trust back with sales and marketing is like, we're not going to
Mm,
pass over every content download or every time someone watched a webinar. Like we all know, you see a piece of content, I don't want sales knocking at my door. Like I'm not ready to have a demo yet. I'm still just scraping the surface. Like I need a little time to warm up. And then when I do want to have a demo, I will ask for it. I will be ready and willing to talk to an expert. And so I think it's just about really the education and warm up phase. And then the other piece is that, just all these different touch points, and making sure that you are giving them enough time and the right content so that they can make an educated decision. So I think it's a little bit of a blend of like what PLG has done, and really thinking about the consumer, but then also still showing up and having like an expert in seat to help to have that conversation when a customer is ready to talk.
awesome. I really like that. Like I think it demonstrates like an empathy with your buyer, right? You're like trying to put yourself in their shoes. Like how are they thinking about it? Like what is the typical lead time? How might they engage with you? And I appreciate you not going after people just because they sign up for an e-form. The amount of SDRs I've had to tell off since I started doing consulting by myself that I'm a one-person band is it's a lot. So
Yeah, exactly.
okay, yeah. So we talked about or touched on a little earlier how things have changed since money stopped being free. We've all been challenged to do more with less. Like how are you thinking about personally like doing more with less, or like trying to be more efficient with the spend and budgets you've been allocated?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a lot of companies are actually leaning into brand, and not just throwing, hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars out on it's a very saturated market, right? Like we all know everyone's in the game of paid ads and sending a bunch of emails and doing LinkedIn posts or sending in paid LinkedIn emails to your inbox. And so I think you got to kind of take a step back and really focus on positioning, on your company narrative, on your, C-level narrative, on what you're actually like an expert on, and then really build on your POV, right? What actually separates you? What value are you adding? And so it starts with organic and like, what is your voice? Um, and then building off of that on specific channel experimentation, right? It's like in an ideal world, you've got your CEO having a platform and talking about a topic, and you've got select experts within your organization who are experts around regulations or security or data privacy or consumer protections, and they have a platform so that folks are actually listening to them and saying, hey, they're helping me, right? I'm learning this area, and I'm following this person because what kind of content I'm reading every time they make a post is helpful for me, right? So it's being helpful. um, and I think the other thing is then experimenting on the organic, right? Like you don't have to pay for content. You've got to obviously pay for the people, but
Hmm.
I think marketing, we could be a little bit more prudent on not just promoting everything, but really like testing it and running these experiments and seeing what sticks. And then also looking across other channels, right? Because email is so saturated, and Instagram and Twitter, it's this echo chamber. um, and so I think areas like Substack are interesting, where that's been kind of a homegrown, bottoms up way for folks who have a strong POV, can build out messaging and really helpful content, and then people can follow without feeling like they're getting hit over the head with a bunch of ads. Um, and then I think on events, right, it's just you see a resurgence, right? And going back to like what works and what doesn't work. Like I think people do want to get out of their house. They're sick of doing these like Zoom happy hours where they send you liquor and you sit on a Zoom call. And I think there's a purpose and a place to still have virtual type of programs, and doing office hours and meeting folks. Like I think that will continue. But I was just at a C-level event down in Half Moon Bay 2 weeks ago, and it was packed with 200 C-level executives.
Mm.
They were very eager to go there to actually network with their peers. They were actually spending more time outside the actual keynote room. Like there was barely anyone actually attending the sessions. They were all there for the hallway chatter, and they really were going booth by booth trying to figure out what vendors were offering, and is this something that fits into their 2025 priorities. So I do believe there's a place and purpose for events in all of this. It's just going to the right ones, and not just showing up to everything hoping for a different outcome. And so the way I look at different things is like back to what I said at the top of the episode. It's awareness, perception, and sales growth, right? Like have a strategy for why you would do everything. Are you trying to build awareness with your market? Are you trying to create a certain message to your audience? And then three, are you trying to get them to buy you, right? To show up. And so I think every single channel or piece of content should fall into those buckets, and should fall into a different campaign segmentation. So it feels organized, and we're not being divisive with what messages we're saying to the same audiences.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, to the in-person event, I've been trying to be more intentional about doing like mixers in San Francisco. I think, yeah, just the serendipity, like you're saying, kind of like those hall conversations, like it is so powerful when you talk to people that are a similar position or facing similar problems. It's like great. So I love what your headspace is with that in terms of bringing a lot of value to your buyers or prospects. You mentioned Substack. Like I'm a huge fan. I probably get like dozens of them a week. But in particular, I used to smile when I heard you or your last employer, Mixpanel, come on as a sponsor on like Lenny's podcast. What are your thoughts on like some of these emerging mediums like that? Like, were you able to see any interesting results from that? I guess mode of advertising.
Yeah, we tried quite a few different podcasts, out in Europe and with different audiences. And I'd say that um, it is it has different elevations, right? Because on one hand, we wanted to get in front of net new, bigger enterprises, and so we went after more of an executive level podcast. And then we were going after PM, right? They were our key end user and stakeholder and champion. And so being associated with Lenny's was a big part of just like the nod to like we know that he is speaking to really amazing PMs who've gone through all different stages of and challenges in their career, and so people are tuning in. Um, And I think it's just more of that subtle, to your point, it's like it's a dark funnel thing, right? It's hard to measure, but I think there's that familiarity where when people do go into that evaluation or research phase, that mixed panel hopefully shows up as like one of their key, vendors as they're looking to make a choice. I will say, like, we did see a huge uptick in our offer. We did like a really amazing startup program where we were giving basically $50,000 in credits in a whole year for free for
Mm,
startups. And during the past few years, right, like there's not a ton of money. So we did see a huge uptick in surge of demand for that startup plan. And then a year after, right, it was a 70% opportunity close won rate for people who were then willing to spend money on buying mixed panel, because we created that stickiness. And hopefully some of that interest came from hearing about mixed panel in those channels like podcast ads, but hard to measure, but it's just a feeling.
totally. Yeah. What I've heard is, or some interesting ways to think about like the impact on brand is like, if your cycle is, X amount of days or months long, you're running a campaign, like run the thought experiment and kind of pre-publish your expectations ahead of time. Like what would you expect to see in terms of a lift,
Mhm.
maybe in H2 or something, and just see like, does that manifest? Even if it is in a classical like first or last touch or U-shaped attribution model, like comes in as something else, like,
Mhm.
are you seeing that lift?
Yeah.
I think is probably I should think about it.
Yeah.
Um, cool. Well, actually, kind of running with that thought a little bit. I've been involved in many annual planning sessions at this point in my career, as I'm sure you have, and a lot of times you kind of have this top-down dictate from the board and the C-suite, and you're told to do X and Y with Z budget, and you come back to them and you're like, well, here are the historicals, and assuming some increase here and there, it's hard to make the ends meet, and that's kind of when the wrestling happens a little bit. Um, how do you think about like meeting executives and teams, or kind of getting those ends to meet when you go through those cycles? Since I know that's like on a lot of people's mind right now. We're approaching the end of the calendar year, and people are pretty deep in annual planning.
Yeah. So the just to dig in a little bit, so how do we make sure we're aligned on like less budget and then more demands from board and an executive team?
Yeah. Just like how do you? Because it's easy, I think, particularly if you're less experienced than you are, to be like, oh yeah, like I'll sign up for that number, or I can do that thing, instead of pushing back and maybe making a case on like what you think is like a reasonable goal to deliver for the business. Kind
Yeah.
of, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the one thing that you've got to really be as a marketer is you have to be super data driven, and you have to go in and really, to your point, like look at the historical data so that you can come back with a informed response if you don't think that you're going to be able to hit that plan, right? And so things like, how long does a deal cycle take? What are the conversion rates for going after mid-market versus commercial versus enterprise? How many people does it take? What is the CAC, right? It's just like there's all these different variables, and the relationship that a marketing team has to have with the finance team and with the operation team you are tied at the hip, because we are building these models bottoms up and top down, trying to figure out how do we feasibly hit these ambitious goals set by the board when we know that our conversion rates are abysmal. And so it's a little bit of that push and pull, and a lot of why I think during these past couple of years businesses are saying, hey, net new business is going to be way harder than if we do these land and expand to our existing customer base. And so I think it is definitely a ongoing dialogue, and something where marketers have to be rooted in data and be able to present factual information to make a case for why you may not be completely aligned, and you're coming at it from a different direction. um and so being able to come into a room with that case and share it, I think has been well received. And so for me personally, like my OKRs and my bonus structure changed, and I was able to negotiate right with the team. So I think it would be, and I've been in the place where I've just blindly said yes, right? So I think it's years of failure and realizing that I'm not being set up for success, and
Hmm.
then, running a fool's errand, that I've now learned that, I don't just have to just take it and say yes, but go back, be thoughtful, come back with an alternative presentation, and then hopefully it's met with a team who sees that thoughtfulness and data and says like, wow, like Lauren's really thinking about this. Okay, maybe we need to relook at it. Because
Hmm.
I think we've all seen in the last couple of years, like businesses do keep on missing their targets and they have to adjust them. So being able to flag that early on is probably the right thing to do, right? If you can see that it doesn't feel like we're all going to be able to have these hockey stick type growth trajectories in these next couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been interesting the last couple of years. Um, yeah. So, you know, kind of read the tea leaves. We had an interesting, uh, you know, Fed announcement come recently that they're probably going to stop the interest rate raises and hinted at maybe like lowered rates next year, which generally has historically boded really well for tech. Um, if you look into your crystal ball, obviously you guys are probably like a little insulated from parts of the market, just being in compliance world or compliance adjacent.
Mhm.
It's something that people have to do. But like, what are you seeing? Are you seeing green shoots in the market in generally next year? Like, when you talk to marketing peers, like what's the thought?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few areas why people will spend money and will buy, right? It's like they've either got to create operational efficiency, they've got to reduce risk, or they've got to scale and grow, or they're buying something that'll help them, like generate more revenue. And so I think you really just got to pick your lane and focus in on what is actually going to help your business most. And so we fit into the reduced risk and creating operational efficiency, meaning, we're really touching on the pain points of like you are spending an exorbitant amount of money on very strategic resources doing very manual processes. And actually that creates a ton of risk because of human error. And so I think if we just like create urgency and really tap into those pain points, that's what's keeping a CISO up at night, right?
Hmm.
These guys have an average tenure of 2 years. And so they can't afford, right, to be vulnerable. And then there's these massive organizations, right? Like I was talking about at the top of the call, like our ICP, that need to buy a solution because their alternative is like doing nothing, which means they're using Excel and email to manage these requests, or they're using OneTrust, which is like poor customer support and is the old kind of first mover, but not the best solution. And so I think it's really just tapping into the pain, and we are actually solving a real problem. And then on top of that, like creating urgency, right? Because there's just more and more regulations that are coming in. Um, and so people just can't afford to keep on avoiding it. And so those are the companies that are buying us, and we've doubled some of our sales cycles in terms of speed, right?
Mm.
Because we've presented a case in which they realize like, yeah, this seems silly to keep making 12 people manage a data subject request. And then I will say we dropped commercial, right? So for the moment, we're focusing on companies that have budget and aren't, being hit as hard by this tech recession.
Hmm.
And we're moving away from tech B2B companies and focusing on these consumer brands, which have a longer life and do have budget, and it is a priority. So we've kind of moved away from the tech sector, to be honest. It's kind of what's happening.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, the regular economy is doing great. I mean, we had like 4.5% GDP growth over the last year. Yeah. I mean, I'm seeing that a lot, like with the companies I'm advising and working with. It's like if they can, like either I know everyone wants to pivot up market. Everyone says that. Not everyone can. But if they can, they do. And I really like that you guys are trying to focus like outside of SaaS. Because I
Mhm.
think it's been a little too like the serpent eating its tail. It's all like, it's like SaaS companies selling to SaaS companies all the way down is not great. So
Yeah.
very cool. Awesome. So I thought we could kind of bend towards a close here with a couple kind of final general questions. But um, Is there anything in particular? I know we talked about some areas of opportunity and things like that, but is there anything in particular you're getting really excited about in marketing writ large right now, or anything that kind of?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited. I'm really inspired and motivated by Emily Kramer and Kathleen Eistrick. They have this Market One newsletter that they've just been publishing just amazing, tangible, helpful, free content for the last, I don't know, year or so. And they've also got their own angel investment. So I would just say like a shout out to if you're a marketer and trying to build your first reporting model or build your first marketing team or create integrated campaigns, like check out their newsletter. I'm a huge fan of the very easy to use content that they've created. And it's been really fundamental. I think so many companies just need internal education on what marketing does and how it interacts, and that's been a really great way to like tie it to the rest of the business. And so I'm excited about what's going on there, because I think, like having been in the product world for so long, it's very measurable. Everyone understands what the role is, whereas marketing is a little bit more obtuse and opaque on getting it. And so I think we're getting to a world in which integrated campaigns is really the path to connecting where marketing sits within the organization, meaning it sits across the entire customer journey, right? And so as you're thinking about how to approach, winning over customers or expanding into net new ones, I think running integrated campaigns is something that wakes me up in the morning and gets me super excited, because it really brings like everyone together, and it's like a big rallying cry for how to win certain segments of your market, and CS and sales and product and marketing are all cheering and winning together.
Very cool. I will definitely second that. Their assets are awesome. Like when I talk to companies that are looking for marketing advice, it's like point them at the Substack. They've been doing great stuff. So I will definitely link to that in the show notes. All right, last two questions. So, um, for someone that's considering getting into marketing today, maybe they're a recent college graduate or indulging like a career pivot, like what kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say get into any area of marketing, right? Like roll up your sleeves and just try all of the different sub kind of specialties. So, learning digital and social and event marketing and customer marketing and product marketing, brand marketing, like marketing ops, like I think there's so many different levels of the craft, but some of the best marketers that I've known or worked with, they've been able to be a Swiss Army knife and spend a little time in each one and just be curious, and that on the job learning is huge, right? You don't go to grad school to get your degree in marketing. You definitely learn it on the job. So my advice is whatever your entry point is, just get as much exposure as possible and purely by osmosis, right? Like see what other people are doing and learning around you, and just get that hands-on experience. And then when there's a chance to try something out and do a stretch project, like raise your hand, because that's the only way you're gonna get better, is just rolling up your sleeves and getting your hands dirty.
Love it. Okay, great. Well, Lauren, if anyone wants to get a hold of you or maybe learn more about DataGrail, what would be a great way to do that?
Ooh, good question. Probably just connect with me on LinkedIn. That's probably where I'm the most active. And yeah, for in terms of DataGrail, we will be having some exciting stuff coming out in the new year. But we're mostly in the U.S. right now in San Francisco. But maybe I'll run into someone at an event or in passing. But yeah, reach out to me directly on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Okay, great connecting and thanks for the time.
All right, thank you.